We also haven't recorded since I saw Hadestown.
Oh my God, yes. I have heard that many tears were shed and that it was beautiful.
Oh, absolutely. It was absolutely gorgeous. I had a wonderful time. I went with my roommate and their partner, who is one of my other friends. We took a weekend trip to New York to see Hadestown. It was incredible. We got to see Alison Russell playing Persephone, and she's just an incredible musician. And we saw a couple of understudies and swings. So we didn't see Lilius White as Hermes. We saw Malcolm Armwood, who's one of the understudies, and he was phenomenal. He has this gorgeous, rich, like Motown style voice.
Ooh.
And because he's younger, he was sort of playing Hermes as kind of like that elder brother, like mentor type figure to
Hmm.
Orpheus, rather than as like a grandparent type figure in the way that like Lilius White or Andre de Shields would play Hermes. We saw the understudy for Orpheus, Brandon Cameron, who was solid. I think was probably the least impressive part of the main cast, but
Hmm.
was still a Broadway actor. So,
Yeah. So the bar is pretty high for talent.
yeah, exactly. Eurydice switched to the understudy halfway through. We saw a so we started with Haley Kilgore, who's the principal for Eurydice right now. And either she was sick or she got injured, because in the second act, we got Casey Dela Cruz, who's one of the understudies. And it was very interesting. They're very different physically and also have very different voices, but it
Hmm.
created kind of unintentional storytelling.
Ooh.
Like unintentional physical storytelling, because Casey Dela Cruz is like physically a lot smaller than Haley Kilgore.
Hmm.
And so it almost created a sense of like Eurydice like physically losing pieces of herself as she's in Hadestown,
Oof.
and like physically shrinking in on herself, not simply emotionally,
Hmm.
which was kind of really cool.
Yeah.
Alison Russell was fucking phenomenal, and the chorus was just made up of like incredibly fucking ripped people.
Oh, not the adjective I was expecting, but all right. I'm not complaining.
Well, I mean, they're in the second act when they're dressed all as workers in Hadestown. They're all wearing the same outfit, which is like cap, brown overalls, and then like a band around the center of their chest. And I'm bi. I'm an equal opportunity ogler.
That's a good line. I like that.
It was a good look for everyone.
I feel like that's slutty in the same way that fingerless gloves on a man are slutty. Like, you didn't need to do that, but you did, and I like it. Please continue.
We saw Tom Hewitt is currently playing Hades. He also has just a gorgeous, gorgeous bass voice. It doesn't have like the sheer sort of like growling power that Patrick Page does on the cast album,
Hmm.
but Patrick Page's voice is so low that at times there isn't really melody to his parts,
Hmm.
whereas Hewitt can deliver sort of like moving lines that occasionally then drop down for growls or pedal tones to enhance particular phrases.
I am also bisexual, and a growling voice in music, it does things to my brain that make it not work.
Yeah.
I have not listened to the entire cast album. I know the plot because it's Orpheus and Eurydice, and B, I've read the Wikipedia summary of the show. But have I told you my very wholesome secondhand family story about Hadestown?
No.
So I have family in Brooklyn. One of my aunts is a costume designer, and she does a lot of smaller shows, like nothing on Broadway that people would have heard of. But she's a working designer, and so she obviously is very tapped into the theater scene in New York. And somehow she had never heard of Hadestown until my cousin, who was probably 8 at the time, who was just the littlest Hellenistic pagan got so fucking into Percy Jackson that she just earnestly believed in Greek gods, went to a Camp Half-Blood themed summer camp, fully 1000% all in on Greek gods. Maybe still is. I haven't asked her about it in a while. But she went up to my aunt and went, Mom, do you know about Orpheus and Eurydice? Do you know about Hadestown? And she was like, what? And so my little baby cousin just gave her the most impassioned, heartbreaking, beat for beat retelling of the story because she had listened to the cast album and presumably also read up on the original myth that literally brought my aunt to tears by the end of it. And she went, well, fuck, I have to take this kid to see Hadestown. And so they did, obviously, and it was amazing and magical. But just to have a little child out of the blue just deliver the most beautiful, sad tragedy you've ever heard, I love that for her. I'm glad she achieved her dream.
I fucking love oral tradition. It's so good.
Good shit.
Also, it was when we went into the theater and there was like snowflakes just starting to fall, and we come out of the theater like 3 hours later and there's like 4 inches of snow on the ground.
Oh my God.
That may be a little bit of an exaggeration, but there was a lot of snow on the ground.
There was a lot. It was magical.
It was very, very cool. It was you entered another world and then come out into an entirely different one than the one you left and the one that you had just spent a few hours in.
So you've had this transformative magical experience, and now you have this transformative magical weather. I love it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I would absolutely see that song again. And I sort of just diverted to calling it a song because the whole piece starts off by saying it's an old song, it's a tragedy, which I love because it's a callback to Greek plays in general, where the chorus tells you exactly what's going to happen in the first few lines of the play. And then they do that exact same thing in Hadestown. You know almost beat for beat how it's going to go. And yet at the end, you're still rooting for Orpheus to maybe this time he'll come out on top. Maybe this time they'll make it. And it's like, we know what happens. We know there is no space for Orpheus and Eurydice to succeed. We know there's no space for Hades and Persephone to succeed in repairing their love either. It simply is a song that we sing again and again and again and again over time for 5,000 fucking years.
Woof.
I love old stories, as may
don't say
have been spoken about on this podcast. And I also love storytelling through music, which we're going to talk about a lot today.
Shall we pivot to a much more recent story?
Let's pivot to music. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Fandom Apprentice. My name is Rin. I grew up with Tolkien and other fantasy series, read to me by my dad, fell in love with fantasy, and decided to share that with my very good friend, Sam.
Hello, I'm Sam. I'm the other one. We have now completed all of the books and the first movie, the extended edition, of course. And this has been very exciting for me. Also wild to just experience the whole story of Fellowship in the span of a couple hours as opposed to months and months and months. It's you know that it says something about my experience of the story when the extended edition is comparatively quick. Like, oh, this is nothing.
I mean, if you listen to like the audiobooks, they're about 60 hours long. Like all three of them together is about 60 hours worth of audio. And, you know, these pages long descriptions of the environment are replaced in the movies with these sweeping shots. We'll get there.
Yes.
So, yeah, we watched the movie on our little trip to New Hampshire that we
Mm-hmm.
took last week. And most of us there had seen it before.
Yeah, I think maybe Miles and I were the only ones who hadn't.
Right. I don't think, yeah, I think both of you were the ones who were new. And just for our listeners, we're not going to go into trivia and like the, oh, how did they do this? Like one little piece. That shit has saturated the internet for 20 years.
Yeah, there is nothing new that we can say about trivia. But what we can do is we can analyze it through the lens of the other analysis that we've done on this show and our
Mhm.
particular interests, the things that we want to deep dive into. So we're going for depth rather than breadth here. And I think that everyone can agree that's the best choice.
Yeah, we're also sort of not going to be talking about the story because as we've mentioned, we've spent I think literally hundreds of hours on the story of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I think that's pretty solid at this point.
So we've sort of beat that one to death.
Mhm.
So instead, we're just going to talk about fun like things that we noticed that we really enjoyed, things that interest us specifically about the series. And really we're going to hone in on visuals and sound, the things that the movie brings to the viewer that the book can't.
Mhm.
Real quick, just for some minor notes of Fellowship. Fellowship of the Ring came out in 2001. It was filmed alongside the other two movies. So they filmed all of these at the same time, which means
Oh.
they filmed some scenes from later movies earlier, some scenes later. It was directed by Peter Jackson, screenplay written by Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens, and Peter Jackson, and features such actors as Elijah Wood as Frodo Baggins, Ian McKellen as Gandalf, Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn, Sean Astin as Sam, Sean Bean as Boromir, Dominic Monaghan as Merry, Billy Boyd as Pippin, John Rhys Davies as Gimli, Orlando Bloom as Legolas, Liv Tyler as Aragorn, Kate Blanchett as Galadriel, Ian Holm as Bilbo, Andy Serkis as Gollum, Sir Christopher Lee as Sauron, and Hugo Weaving as Elrond, among other various actors.
Not to super interrupt your flow, but it was very funny. You did say Liv Tyler as Aragorn instead of Arwen, which is hilarious to imagine in my mind. And I just want everyone listening to also envision that because, again, we're bisexual. We're down for that. So you're welcome. Please continue.
Gender bend Aragorn today.
Listen, I bend Aragorn any way he'll let me.
Collectively, the films had 30 Academy Award nominations and 17 wins.
Woo!
I have my criticisms of the films, but I still really, really enjoy them. They're
Mhm.
super fun. They have a super tight visual style. The sound, the effects, everything is just fucking excellent. And we'll dive deeper into that. But I want to touch on a couple of actors' backgrounds really quick. A lot of these actors were pretty young when they started, but I want to touch on Ian McKellen, Viggo Mortensen, Kate Blanchett, and Sir Christopher Lee.
Which is good, especially for me, because I do not know celebrities. I do not know movies. This is a fun fact about me that many of my friends know. I just haven't seen most movies. It's not my go to form of media. So I don't know anything about actors or celebrities in general. So you could tell me literally anything about these people and I'll believe that it's true, but I trust you to be a diligent researcher.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk too much about their resumes, their filmography in particular, because that's all freely available on their Wikipedia pages. But a lot of these actors were super young when they came into this movie. They had, some resumes. Some of them were fans of the books. Some of them were not. Sir Ian McKellen, who played Gandalf, came out as gay in 1988 and is a co-founder of the Stonewall LGBT rights lobby group in the UK, which is one of the largest queer rights organizations in the UK.
Holy shit, that's awesome.
His background is in theater. He's been acting professionally since 1961
Oh my god.
and has consistently since then been on stage and screen. He has hundreds of acting credits across stage, big screen, small screen. He, at the same time as these movies coming out, was also playing Magneto in the X-Men movies.
All right, awesome.
So he was already a pretty big name at the time. Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn wasn't quite as big a name, but he's got a very impressive background. He's Danish.
I'd say his background is impressive. To be fair. Sorry, just every time we mention Aragorn, you can just imagine that I've edited out a dreamy sigh. Yeah, just
Yeah,
continue.
he's fucking gorgeous for starters.
Yeah, and I just can't not talk about it. But we have a show to make, so I will attempt to restrain myself.
He can restrain me if he likes,
Thank
or
you. I
vice
set you up for
versa.
that.
Viggo Mortensen is a published author. He has
Oh,
multiple published poetry books in 3 languages.
oh, he writes poems. He's sensitive. He's an artist.
He's lived in Venezuela, Denmark, Argentina, and the US.
Okay.
He speaks at least 3 languages fluently. The only big name film that I really recognized on his resume from prior to Lord of the Rings was Psycho. He also has been super outspoken politically for the last 25 years, since doing press tours for these movies, including after the US invasion of Iraq, doing press tours for these movies wearing a shirt that says "No more blood for oil."
Oh, holy shit. Okay. He
He's
rules.
been he's been outspoken politically against Israeli occupation in Palestine since 2002.
Amazing.
He also has been outspoken for Catalan independence
Oh my god.
in Spain. He has donated money to various left-wing political parties, Sinn Féin in Ireland. Um, he spoke out against the Israeli invasion of Gaza in the last few years. So he's just kind of a fucking gem.
Was he grown in a lab? There are multiple people in real life who I've described as sapphic catnip. He's just human catnip. That's an A+ guy.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal. I didn't know any of that. Amazing.
Well, and that's not even getting into his acting skills. He read Fellowship of the Ring on the plane to New Zealand. He had never read Fellowship before
Oh my
before
god.
getting this role. He did not know about Aragorn prior to getting this role. He convinced Peter Jackson to allow Aragorn to say more of his lines in Elvish because he, as a multilingual person, was like, Aragorn's also multilingual. Let's have him speak in the languages he speaks.
Amazing.
He also convinced the costume designers to let him carry a bow because he was like, I'm a ranger. I'm out in the wild alone. I would have a bow.
He had so much input on his costume. I didn't really have many more specific trivia bits about it, but yeah, he was involved. I did a lot of costume research.
He also composed the music for the Lay of Beren and Luthien that he sings at one point.
Stop. Oh my god.
Yeah, the little a cappella rendition there that he sings is his composition.
Perfect man.
Yeah, I have nothing more to say on him. He's perfect, and every time he shows up on screen, I die a little inside. Cate Blanchett. I don't have too much to say about her. She plays Galadriel. She's fucking gorgeous. She's a classically trained Shakespearean actress. She also has been an outspoken activist for environmental rights, women's rights, immigrant rights, and has been involved with Artists for Ceasefire in the last few years. And then finally, Sir Christopher Lee as Sauron. Sir Christopher Lee is one of the oldest actors on this set. He passed away in 2015 at the age of 93.
Oh, shit.
He is also very impressive. He is step cousins with Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond.
Okay.
He met Rasputin's assassins
Oh my
and
God.
later played Rasputin.
That is dedication to research.
I don't think it was as research, but he met them, I think,
Just
when he
happened
was
to.
young and then later played Rasputin.
That's wild.
When he was attached to the RAF during the Second World War, he was in Naples and went and hiked Vesuvius 3 days before it erupted.
Oh.
He spoke at least 4 languages fluently. He was a talented fencer. He's the son of an Italian noblewoman and a British army officer. After the war, he helped hunt down Nazi war criminals.
Amazing.
He claimed to have been attached to special forces during World War II. Some people have said that he embellished his service record or allowed people to spread rumors about what he did that weren't fully true. But Peter Jackson does say at one point there's a direction in, I believe, Two Towers, where someone gets stabbed in the back and Peter Jackson was giving direction and Christopher Lee goes, "That's not what a man who's stabbed in the back sounds like." And Peter Jackson in the interview goes, "I suddenly remembered that he'd done some slightly clandestine things during the Second World War and probably knew a little bit more about me than this."
Yeah.
Or a little bit more than me about this.
Jeez.
His first acting credit is in 1947, and he continued through his death. He is also a heavy metal and opera singer.
I did not expect either of those things.
He's got, that gorgeous bass voice. Yeah. He's also super fucking tall. He played Count Dracula for years in various films. He's just phenomenally fucking impressive.
Yeah, God.
And plays the best goddamn villain.
Later, I need to Google how much all these actors got paid for this movie, because what kind of fucking budget do you have to shell out to A, just make such a good movie, but B, to get all of these incredibly impressive people?
The movie itself had a pretty high budget. This movie alone had a budget of $93 million.
What's that in today money?
Well, let's find out.
I mean, still an incomprehensibly big number. I can't imagine 93 million of anything.
So in 1999, when this movie was made, 175 million in 2024 money.
Damn. Okay. So that's almost twice.
It brought in $887 million at the box office in 2001 money, which in 2024 was over $1 billion. 1.5 over 1 point, like nearly $1.6 billion at the box office in 2024 money.
Yeah, so that kind of shows the scope that we're working with here.
Yes, these were very, very high budget films, and they remain some of the highest grossing films ever. So that's just a few little pieces on some of the actors that we see on screen. Do we want to get into sort of preliminary thoughts, observations before we dive into our special interests?
Yes. So I did not take notes while I was watching the movie because I just wanted to enjoy the movie. And so just thinking about it afterward, the things that stuck out to me, I had a couple of random little bits and bobs of thoughts. The first one is that the movie opens with Isildur and Sauron fighting, which, first of all, establishes a generally chronological order that makes the movie a fucking breeze compared to the books, because it's just all laid out nice and neat in order and comprehensible, and there's not really a lot of flashbacks. A plus. But B, seeing Sauron as a guy is weird. I knew that he had on some level a physical body because he had a hand that could be cut off, but it was still really jarring and strange. I felt like I couldn't even be that scared of him because I wasn't used to associating all of his evil with a humanoid shape. So I was just kind of going, oh, that's a guy in stupid looking armor, but scary guy. Seeing Hobbiton populated with so many hobbits, was I was charmed instantly because we know, again, like we know on some level that there's a whole population besides our hobbits, but to see it so full and thriving, and there's so many little hobbit children and hobbits
The
just
Hobbit
doing their
kids were
thing.
so cute.
Imagine how fun it must have been to be a hobbit kid actor to just run around in a field in a silly outfit.
And I think Peter Jackson's kid was one of the Hobbit actors.
Oh, that's so cute. I mean, if I had a kid, I'd make them a hobbit in the movie, no question.
I really love when Bilbo is sitting telling the story of like pieces of the Hobbit to the Hobbit kids about the trolls,
That was
and you
so
can
good.
tell that like these little kids are not, you know, professional actors, but it flashes to one of the kids' faces as he's telling the story, and the kid just goes, and you can tell it was like somebody told this kid, "Okay, now gasp and look surprised," and they
Hmm.
did their best, and it's so cute.
And also, what a good way to just slip in a little bit of exposition about the story of The Hobbit by having it be a story told to children. Ugh, perfect. I loved it. I loved it so much.
Well, and the section about the trolls, later we see the trolls,
Yeah.
which was very, very fun.
And there's also so much hugging. I know that these movies are known for their depictions of affection, but I still was not prepared for all the hugging, and I was delighted every time. Frodo launches himself at Gandalf when he sees his little cart rolling by, and Gandalf just gives him a big hug. It's amazing. It made me so happy. And another Hobbit thing that I enjoyed was that they introduced Rosie at the beginning of the fucking story, like they should have done in the books. If they had done in the books what they did in the movie, I never would have had a problem. Just that she's there, and Frodo goes, "Oh, go ask Rosie for a dance," and pushes Sam out into the party. That's literally all we needed, just confirmation that this woman exists and that Sam has clapped eyes on her at least once. That's it. And so we got that. So Rosie gets a pass from me.
I also love that she's taller than he is.
Oh, I didn't notice that. That's cute. I think he'd like a strong woman.
Yeah, I think to the way it was presented, it does feel more in the movie as if Frodo and Sam are friends and not boyfriends, as we were constantly reading them in the book.
Hmm.
They're played a little more platonically, but it's not a bad interpretation.
No, not at all. And they do still obviously, and again, I've only seen the first movie so far, but they do still obviously have a very intense closeness. They put their faces much closer together than necessary, and that makes me happy. They're obviously comfortable with each other, and that was
Hmm.
delightful.
Hmm.
And also, speaking of hobbits on the other end of comfort and happiness, Bilbo and Gandalf too, but mostly Bilbo, is just a hair's breadth away from fucking losing it at any given moment. We see how unhinged and corrupted he is immediately. Whereas in the books, I feel like that's a little bit of a slower reveal. We have to put it together more. But I really, really enjoyed that. That we see, oh no, something is wrong with this hobbit. And Gandalf is just exhausted.
Gandalf is exhausted, but he is also himself kind of exhausting, which is just very fun.
Mhm.
I felt like the role of Merry and Pippin was reduced. It was kind of just converted to comic relief.
Yeah, they don't really do a whole lot. They're just fucking around setting off fireworks. They're fine, they're there, but they in this movie don't do much.
Yeah, and we'll get more of them, and it does, you know, mirror their growth over the book series. But for the first movie, they really just are kind of bumbling comedy.
Mhm. And we do still, though, see Gandalf's differing tolerances for them. For Merry, he's dispensing wizardly grandfatherly advice, saying, always follow your nose down in the cave. Whereas Pippin, he goes, I will fucking slam your head into this rock if you make one more sound. What did Pippin do to you? He did nothing. But it is very funny to see the difference in how he treats them. Other little bits. The Council of Elrond is short. Thank God. Appreciated that. You had a thing?
I was going to go back briefly to Bree,
Yes, yes.
just for roughly chronological order.
Mhm.
The Prancing Pony is much shadier than in the books.
Yeah.
Whereas I felt like it's a nice meeting place, and yeah, there's kind of some shady people in the corner, but that's weird. That stands out as strange.
Hmm.
Whereas here it feels like this is a shady place.
Yeah.
And I always sort of imagine Bree to be kind of like a pastoral town rather than sort of a denser medieval city as it's presented in the movies, but design choices, that's fine. Also, when we get our first shot of Strider in here, you laughed out loud.
I did.
You fucking lost it.
It's so comical. The dark, broody stranger in the corner. You can feel the DM coaxing their party to talk to this character they've created. And the party's just going, oh, but I want to talk to Boblin the Goblin over there. What's his deal? What's his mom's favorite color? Let's go see if he has a dog. Does he need anything? Whereas Strider is just sitting brooding in his fucking cloak all by himself. And like you said, because the rest of the inn is presented as being kind of seedy, it loses some of its impact. Whereas, because like you, I was imagining it being kind of pastoral, it being a really nice, pleasant place where everyone's having a good time and drinking and hanging out and singing songs, and then poof, spooky guy in the corner. But here, he's just sitting by himself for no reason. And he's just a little bit comical instead of impressive.
That said, when his hand pops out of nowhere, grabs Frodo and goes, calls him Mr. Underhill and shoves him up the stairs, gets to the top and throws back his hair, throws back his hood, and he's greasy and also hot. And I'm like, fuck, sir, do you want to manhandle me up the stairs and shove me into a side room? Because we can do that. Uh,
There were multiple points where Aragorn would do something just completely normal, and we would go, this is pornographic. This is indecent. I can't believe that this is in this movie.
And maybe it's because our D&D group is 6 bisexual disasters, more or less. Not
We
to
were all just
assign
like,
identities to everyone in our D&D group, but
yeah. Where are you on the there's only one identity gradient, and it's from bisexual to disaster.
now I can be corrected if I'm wrong.
Mhm.
But I don't think Tolkien fully named the Hobbit meals in the book, besides
I
supper and elevensies.
I think he might have, but I have a way to find that out through my very legitimate sources. Let's see.
Yeah,
Control
he
F.
does say that hobbits like 6 meals a day when they can get them.
I searched for the word luncheon and didn't find anything.
About second breakfast.
There's one mention of elevensies. Let's see, second breakfast. And nothing about second breakfast, although it is possible they might have been named in The Hobbit. I don't know off the top of my noggin, but at least in the Lord of the Rings books as such, I do not believe they're named.
Yeah, so I couldn't remember whether it's the movies that have given rise to the popular names for the Hobbit meals. Merry and Pippin discuss 7 meals rather than the 6 that Tolkien mentions: breakfast, second breakfast, elevensies, luncheon, afternoon tea, dinner, and supper.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, just a observation. And then my one other piece before we get to the Council of Elrond is the way that Aragorn enters the scene in the fight at Weathertop,
Mm-hmm.
where in Frodo's vision, he's highlighted in black while the wraiths are glowing in white. Whereas in the non-ring world, the Mordor characters are frequently highlighted in dark colors. They wear, you have the Black Riders, you have the grayness and darkness of Mordor and all the orcs, and then the elves and goodness is much more in light colors.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just kind of a cool shot, a cool juxtaposition there of things being flipped in the upside down.
Yeah, and we can talk about this more too when we talk about special effects in later movie episodes. But the whole vibe of the ring world and the way that that's shown is really good. It's really disorienting and upsetting. Putting on the ring is not pleasant to do, and it's not pleasant to watch, and it works really well.
Mm-hmm. My only piece from the Council of Elrond is that the shots of the reflections of everybody arguing in the ring,
Yes.
like Frodo's sheer focus on the ring and showing us the reflections of everybody arguing as sort of a representation of how much Frodo's focusing on that, whereas where the ring is in the center of his thoughts, not the conflict around him.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a lot of, and this is throughout the whole movie, not just in the Council of Elrond, long lingering shots of people's faces when they're talking,
Mm-hmm.
and of the ring itself. So yeah, very frequently we're very tight in on somebody's face, which is kind of, it's an interesting direction choice. I don't know enough about movie making to comment more on it, but
There's also just a lot of weird, funky camera angles. We get a Gandalf POV inside Bag End at one point, and it's fun. You never know what the camera's going to do at any given moment. It's very lively. But all I had to say about the Council of Elrond was that it was short. It was over quickly, and I appreciated that. And Boromir is 1,000% more likable in the movies. Now we know that I've gone on a journey and I appreciate and I respect Boromir more. But we remember at the beginning of that journey when I hated his guts. And in the movie, he's a little bit forceful in his opinions, but I don't have him written off as a total douchebag right from the jump.
I was sort of viewing him as like, he's a foil to Aragorn, but he's playing the arrogant warrior prince super well,
Mm-hmm.
while still managing to be this charismatic leader. You can see how, were he not as charismatic, were he not as forceful, you wouldn't want to follow him.
Mm-hmm.
But he has that force of personality that draws you to him.
Yeah, and we also see him having some lighthearted moments with the Fellowship. We see him literally playing with Merry and Pippin, which is so cute and melted my heart. But I think that represents all of the little moments of group bonding that they had in the story, but that we didn't get to see on the page, that were
Mm-hmm.
why everyone loved him so much. And so just by getting a little bit of that, that helps make him so much more charming and so much more sympathetic. So I really appreciated that.
Right after, in the Council of Elrond, right after Aragorn says the "you have my sword" line, before it goes to Legolas so he can have the "you have my bow," there's a shot of Gandalf who fucking winks at Elrond.
Oh my God. I missed that.
Which is just a Gandalf going, I told you it would work out. I told you this was what was going to happen. We could have spared so much time. We're going to dive more into costumes in a few minutes. I know, because that's something you wanted to talk about. But when they're passing over Cahadras, I really took notice of the differences between Boromir and Aragorn's costumes.
Mm-hmm.
Because Aragorn, despite being Isildur's heir, is dressed very simply and his clothing is largely unadorned. Whereas Boromir's cloak is patterned with swirls and he's got embroidery on his tunic and his goatee is very neatly trimmed. His sword is super fine. His cloak is like velvet. His shield is polished. And Aragorn and his gear don't look dirty or mistreated, but all of it is well used.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing looks new. It looks like he has been in the wild, like he has been a warrior for many years.
One of the lines from one of the costume designers that I read when I was researching my section was that Viggo Mortensen, again, A+ guy, said that he really wanted to feel like Aragorn's costumes were lived in and that he hadn't just put them on for the movie. So, I mean, in addition to the storytelling element, that was also Viggo being like, no, you don't understand. He needs to be a grimy man. He needs to have the well-worn clothes for it to work.
And another observation later, the scene in the tower where Sauron is talking to Lurtz, the Uruk-hai captain, felt very Rocky Horror, Frankenfurter, and Rocky moment.
Mhm.
Because Lurtz is just standing there, like, in a loincloth while Saruman walks around him and,
Yeah.
like, gets up super close in his face. It's like, it's. At any moment, I expected him to break out into, you know, I've been making a man with long hair and a tan.
I mean, he does have long hair, so there's that.
I think the line is technically blonde hair and a tan, but long hair for the orc. Before we get to set pieces, I noticed one major costume goof, which
Mm.
was during Boromir's death scene. His skin looked like it was rising up into his hairline
Oh.
because it was apparently nearly 100 degrees Fahrenheit when they were filming. And so, sweat fucking up the makeup,
Oh no.
fucking up the where they blended into the wig was a little bit off. um,
Whoops.
I also love the parallels at the very end between Aragorn's pledge to Frodo.
I would have gone with you to the end. Into the very fires of Mordor.
With Boromir's last words.
I would have followed you, my brother. My captain. My king.
Mhm.
Ugh. So fucking good.
Yeah.
This whole movie is just super super tight, and both visually, storyline wise, and it's been criticized for sort of taking the sweeping adventure and the subtleties of Tolkien's world and collapsing them down into like generic sword and sorcery fantasy. But I still think it tells the story well. If it's designed to be faster moving, if it's designed to be a little more aggressive, it does that for the format and for the audience. I sort of see this movie as kind of a separate piece of media. They're incredible. They're some of the best adaptations of a book to screen that I've ever seen. But it's a different way of telling the story.
Mhm.
It's a retelling. It's kind of like it's a little like the Mere Wife is for Beowulf.
Yeah.
You've made some changes to the overall story to effectively tell the same story arc, if not an identical tale. Anyway, that's my sort of like general thoughts on the movie.
Yeah, my last sort of general thoughts were the sense of scale was really good, whether it was giant spaces or big crowds of enemies or really tight claustrophobic spaces. It all worked amazingly. Textures, the tactileness of it all, I'll talk about more in my deep dive section. And then I also had a question from one of my friends who knew that I was watching the movie but wasn't there with us. And they wanted to know what I thought about Frodo as a protagonist so far. And I know that there's been mixed reviews and some changes to the overall framing of the story because so much of Frodo's struggle is internal. I don't know about the other two movies, but at least in this one, he was super charming and really earnest and innocent. And I was just looking at him going, oh boy, he is going to break. All of the shining light will be gone from his eyes by the end of this story.
He's
But
just going to get progressively grimier. And unfortunately, not in a hot way.
there's not so much internal struggle in this one. It's a pretty straightforward movie protagonist. So in this one, he works. In future movies, I will probably be revisiting that idea. And we had also talked about that too at the end of the books of like, whose story is it and who are we following? So that's a theme that's in my mind. But in terms of overall big thoughts, those are my overall big thoughts.
Also, before we move on to our deep dive sections, obviously, this is telling the same story that we have used to cite our rules of fantasy before, but just to show that they do, in fact, travel over to the visual media, Gandalf and Sauron are the most dramatic Gandalf and Sauruman. Also Sauron with that fucking armor in the beginning, but they're the most dramatic motherfuckers.
Oh my god. Their interactions together are so much.
Magic makes you dramatic, and interacting with another wizard makes you even more fucking dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
We get rule 2. If there is a tavern, there will be plot. And usually that plot gets delivered by a broody man in the corner. I don't remember what rule number 3 is. It's not in our notes.
I think that might be the
So
time one, and it's not in our notes because we couldn't think of a good way to phrase it.
It was the story, time responds to the story. The story does not respond to time, I believe, is our new phrasing of it.
Yeah, I think so.
And that is the case that this movie is like compressed from the 17-year gap in chapter 2
Mm-hmm.
of Fellowship. Rule number 4, it all comes back to Beowulf. We'll get into design choices, honestly, more with this rule in Two Towers especially. And rule number 5, friendship is magic. Yeah, it is. It's just a magical little story. Frodo and Sam, when they're going off in the boat together at the end, or when Frodo pulls Sam from the water, that's just a magical little moment.
Yeah.
Also, with friendship as magic, when Galadriel shows Frodo the visions of the Shire burning,
Mm-hmm.
the thing that really seems to harm Frodo the most is the image of Sam in chains.
Oh, I missed that. I mean, I saw the image, but I didn't pick up on Frodo's reaction to that specifically.
I feel like you don't see Frodo's face right there, but very shortly afterwards he's pulled out of the vision.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like that's the climax of that little mini segment.
Yeah.
And so that's what is going to eventually pull him out of it. So we have a couple of things we wanted to deep dive in on.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I think I have a feeling mine might be shorter, but I always curse things by saying they'll be short and then we talk for a very long time. So we'll see how it goes. But like I said before, the thing that struck me visually with this movie was how tactile it was, the cluttered spaces. Everyone, shout out to Bilbo and Saruman specifically, for just having messy fucking offices. They've got papers, it's scrolls everywhere. This is not neat. These people don't have secretaries, and I respect that. They live in fucking dumps, and sometimes that's just the
As I
way
look
it
at the
is.
piles of books around my room, including on my desk right now.
It's real, it's lived in. And most of my observation of that gravitated towards the textiles. But I know that there's a lot of cool ceramics in these movies, and I had seen some little snippet somewhere about how all the ceramics in the movies were handmade, and so I was curious about that because there was also so much there, just in all the objects they were interacting with had this awesome weight and presence to them. So the little bit about ceramics before we get into costumes. Mirek Smishik was the lead ceramicist artist who did all of the like plates and cups and things for the movies. And he was basically the coolest guy ever. Like everyone involved in this movie is so amazingly cool. I was not expecting his kick-ass Wikipedia page. He was born in 1925. He fled the Czech coup during whenever that happened. And he spent most of World War II in labor camps because he was involved in anti-Nazi resistance. And then he moved to Australia and then to New Zealand and just became an amazing ceramic artist. And his kilns are now registered historic sites in New Zealand. And he made over 700 pieces of pottery for these movies, including, and maybe this is a well-known piece of trivia that was just news to me because everything about these movies is news to me, but a lot of them he made, identical pieces in 3 different sizes so they would be the appropriate scale for whatever size character was holding them. And I thought that was really fun. So yeah, just cool guy making beautiful objects for this film. Another funny little use of prop scale was when they're in the Prancing Pony. Merry and Pippin are getting their mugs of beer, and I don't remember which one of them sets it down, but there's this huge fucking tankard, and one of them goes, "What is that?" And the other one goes, "It's a pint." And the first one goes, "It comes in pints." Just and that the brilliance and innovation going, "Oh, holy shit, we can put this in bigger cups." Delightful. 10 out of 10. Fucking loved it.
Well, and Sam calling out after him going, "You've had a whole half already."
Mm-hmm. So good.
Ugh,
Did
it's
you have
phenomenal.
anything on plates and cups specifically?
Chip the glasses, crack the plates. That's what Mirek Smishik hates.
Wrong movie, but I'm sure he would hate it very much if they were chipped and cracked. But also, maybe them being chipped and cracked would give them life in the appropriate setting. Who's to say? It would be done artfully. But that was
Also,
Mhm.
if I had a nickel for every artist involved with this movie who was involved in anti-Nazi resistance, I have 2 nickels.
2 nickels at least. Those were just the ones we researched.
Which is not a lot.
Yeah, so who's to say?
More than
Fucking
expected.
rules.
But it's weird that it happened twice. But it's fucking phenomenal that it happened twice.
Mm-hmm.
Chuck a piece of ceramic at a Nazi today.
This is an anti-Nazi podcast, if you haven't already picked up on that. But moving on to costumes. So much has been said about the costumes in these movies, but the things that stood out to me, like I said, were the textures. And Gandalf's robe was the first thing that struck me because it's so nubbly, I think is the best word. It's not smooth. It has this roughness to it, this lived in, worn texture that I guess was just not what I had envisioned. I knew that he was wearing traveling clothes, but I imagined they'd be kind of nice traveling clothes because he's a wizard and he can be fancy. No, he is grimy in his own special way. And Ian McKellen apparently did insist on adding more mud to Gandalf's cloak. But the fabric choices were really interesting to me. And I was doing a whole bunch of research on that. There was a thing on a costume forum from 2017 that I was unable to fact check, but there was a guy who claimed that there were still active NDAs about some specific details of the costumes. And so it was hard to confirm if people who were doing cosplay could find screen accurate fabrics because what fabric they used was very hush hush. But there were a lot of interviews with the 2 lead designers, and the main one was Ngila Dickinson, and she had talked about these very specific looks that she came up with for elves, dwarves, humans, hobbits, wizards as like her main categories. I didn't really hear anything about orcs in the bits that I researched, but their costumes were also very good. So I thought I would just go over briefly how their visual style was established to indicate things about them through their clothing, just as a general framework. And then if there are specific costumes that are interesting in later movies, we can look at them more closely. But the approach that was taken to design their vibe. So for the elves, Dickinson had said, they invoke their environment and they're very light on the earth. So we searched for very, very fine layers of fabrics for them. And they have this sort of diaphanous, otherworldly look. The Rivendell elves have a little more color and texture than other elves. And especially, this comes up in Frodo's costumes a little bit too, but especially if we're thinking about this fantasy pre-industrial society, it's hard to overstate in real human history how very, very, very expensive all fabric was before mechanized weaving. That's why looms and mills were such huge deals in the Industrial Revolution, because all fabric, even basic shitty fabric, was just impossibly precious. So for the elves to have all of these incredible silk brocades and these fine linens and all of these decorative, superfluous, finely embroidered and embellished things is just the unimaginable wealth and infinite time that immortals have to create this clothing for themselves. So it works, chef's kiss, perfectly. And in the cut of the fabrics, they have a lot of long lines to give the actors like a taller, more otherworldly, ethereal look that really works. That's why they have all those long sleeves and high necklines to sort of elongate their bodies, which I thought was very cool. Did you have any takes on elves? I don't just want to talk straight on
No,
through this whole
please.
section if you have things, but I trust you to pipe up. I could just keep going, and I will.
I had one sort of elf costume thought, which was the shift in Galadriel's costume when she becomes the Dark Queen.
Yes, that was so good.
Is she goes from her like white, almost like wedding gown like dress to wearing armored breastplate like she's a Valkyrie in a Wagnerian opera.
Mm-hmm.
She goes from being a like spiritual character to being a warrior queen.
Yeah.
And that was just a really cool visual moment.
Mm-hmm. For the dwarves, there was not so many details and also not many dwarves in Fellowship, but at least for Gimli, he has a very boxy, utilitarian structure to his clothing and his armor, but it's still very heavily ornamented. It's still a lot worked in metal and leather and things where you can display that kind of dwarven craftsmanship.
Yeah, his helmet I noticed specifically with you still had like knot work almost or
Mm-hmm.
like it looked like some of the lines were woven together similar to some of the elves, the lines on some of the elves' clothing, and also the props and things, particularly in Lothlorien,
Mm-hmm.
the set pieces. But where all of the elven lines are curved, all of the dwarf lines are straight with hard angles.
Mm-hmm. Which makes sense if you're working in stone and metal, easier to do.
Exactly. As opposed to growing it out of pieces of wood or fabric or whatever. And I liked that sort of similarity and yet juxtaposition of these two ancient races that kind of hate each other
Mm-hmm.
and yet have so much more in common than than different.
Yeah. And I just love Gimli. I was happy to see him. That's my boy. I love him so much. He's so good. The hobbits from another Dickinson interview were really heavily based on 18th century sort of pastoral country clothing. And that's a style that's very recognizable to us just from real history. I did learn a in-universe lore fact about why hobbits wear short pants. Is this a well-known thing to people? That I will be happy to
Not
tell
to
you about the
me.
short pants. So I assumed, and I think that this is also true, that this was another silhouette thing, that giving them the short pants sort of makes their feet proportionally bigger in addition to the silly feet shoes, helps make them look shorter. And that also then reminded me of a Tumblr post I saw about Joey Beatty and what's his face? The other one, The Witcher. What's his name?
Henry Cavill.
Henry Cavill. How in The Witcher they're the same height roughly and they have very similar builds, but the way that their costuming is done makes Joey Beatty's character, whose name I don't know how to pronounce, seem
Yaskir.
Yaskir. Okay, I'm never sure. I haven't watched the show or played the games. But makes Yaskir seem sort of smaller and more boyish and sillier, even though he's just this giant, jacked man. You can really do a lot with cut and silhouette, and especially in these movies where height and scale are so important. That's important. But the in-universe lore fact that the costume designer came up with, which I thought was so funny, was they have short pants because they don't wear shoes. So it's not important to them to really cover and protect their lower leg and ankle and feet. They're not really worried about getting the bottom of their pants dirty. It's not important. If you don't have that hard line of this is where shoe starts and pants begins, just culturally it doesn't matter. So they just wear short pants. They're stomping
I
around in the
fucking
dirt.
love
So
that.
yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I just went, yeah, of course. Of course there would be an in-universe reason for why hobbits wear short pants. Why wouldn't there be? And also that's just sort of a historical style. Another thing tying back to the value of textiles and class signifiers is Frodo's clothes are very, very similar to the other hobbits in cut, but different in fabric. So he has a tweed frock coat and he has a different style of button. He has these more ornamental rounded buttons as opposed to Sam having very basic clothing and these little flat buttons. And that's also true of historical clothing in England in general. You think about fancy court ladies having these big, elaborate dresses, and normal working lower class women wore the pretty similar styles and cuts, but it was all down to what fabrics and what materials were used to signify class and to signify the occasion that different clothes would be worn. So I like that there was just little different subtle signals through the costuming that Frodo's just a little better off than everybody else. And as for humans, like we talked about, Viggo Mortensen had a lot of input on his costume. And you had talked about contrasting him to Boromir, his sort of more subdued look. He does have a couple of fancier outfits, like we see him in Rivendell a little more dressed up. Apparently, according to the costume designer, he also has on some of his inner layers, like his shirt and stuff that we don't see as much, some more embroidery, some more finer materials that indicate literally that there is more underneath his rough exterior. And there are these finer items that he has been given or has obtained that are in alignment with his status that are under all of his griminess. There's this more expensive shining embellished also in sort of like the more elven style, which is fun. So there's literal layers and I love it so much.
I also really like thinking about that because even his fancier clothes in Rivendell are more understated than Boromir's clothing. And even at that point, Boromir is wearing just his cleaned up like tunic and gambeson. So it's the same thing that he wears on the road. Boromir's not making a distinction between who he is out in the wild and who he is in this formal space. Whereas Aragorn is like, yeah, I'm working out here. As opposed to here, like, I'm in a meeting.
Yeah. I'm home. I've got a beautiful elf girlfriend to seduce. I gotta look nice.
I fucking love how they did Arwen and Aragorn in this. I was disappointed when I first watched these movies that like Glorfindel wasn't there. Because I, as a child was a textual purist in the most annoying way. But I like, like with Rosie, Arwen being more of an important part of the films allows us to get to know her more and feel like their relationship is more real. And then there's elements of the appendix of the story of Arwen and Aragorn appendix scattered in throughout the movie itself. So we see that build of their relationship. We see Aragorn at his mother's grave before he goes off. We see him with the shards of Narsil. And I just thought that was really, really well done.
Also, I mean, two things about their relationship. One, there's a lot of soft focus in this movie, and it's really nice. It gives it this sort of dreamy fairy tale effect. And there's this one perfect shot of Arwen and Aragorn kissing in the forest, and they're just surrounded by all of this beautiful nature, and it's sort of hazy and lovely and perfect, and just chef's kiss everywhere. Loved it, loved it. But also, speaking of their relationship, the first shot where Arwen is introduced. Another one. Borderline pornographic. Is the sword under Aragorn's chin? I believe
Yes,
it is. Yeah.
it
So
is.
Aragorn's just chilling, and then you just see a sword enter from the side of the screen, lift up his chin. Then it's fucking Arwen. To have the lady be the one with the sword, it's they gave a gift to bisexuals. They gave many gifts to bisexuals in these movies, but that specifically, so good. So good. Love Arwen. She
Well,
rules.
and her little in Elvish, little, what do we have here type thing, which is she fully meant to fuck that man into the ground
Oh,
in that
absolutely.
moment.
Yeah.
That was meant to be a seduction until she realized there was a problem.
That was pre-negotiated. This is an established dynamic.
That was phenomenal.
It was so good. It was so good. Anyway, reining it in, costumes, Boromir, literally the only thing I wrote for him was very straightforward knight shit. He is what it says on the tin. He's got a cool outfit. It's great. It's embroidered. Moving on. Wizards. Gandalf and Saruman obviously have a lot of contrast between them in their outfits. Gandalf has this rougher textured fabric. There's a lot of debate about what color his costume actually was in person, if it was more, because it looks very gray on film, but because of movie magic, if his actual costume is more brown or more gray, who cares? But it's this very cool, unique color. He's got lots of layers and tatters. Like I said, Ian McKellen suggested adding the mud to the hem of his cloak. And then you flip that and contrast that with Saruman, who has much more grandeur. And his clothes are very, very elf-like in their structure, but with much heavier fabrics. And if we're thinking about the philosophy behind the elf costuming, that their tread upon the earth is light, they're not really of this material plane, whereas Saruman has this solidness and this desire to impose his will on the world, but still kind of chasing that similar elven aesthetic and mastery of many things. He's like that, but the more, I don't know, he's, I guess imposing is the word that I'm looking for. More imposing, solid, dense, heavy fabric. It's all the same color, it's all white, so he's got lots of different cool textures going on there. And it works. It works so well. But that was basically the overview of the fabric choices and things that I had noticed in the costumes just overall as a vibe. And then with those things in mind, it'll be interesting to see later on in the movie how, now that we have those rules established, how they'll change. And those will contribute to the storytelling as we go. That is my deep dive. That is my special interest fabric time. I now turn it over to Rin's special interest time.
So, my special interest. I want to talk about the music.
Yes.
I've mentioned before on this podcast, I'm a musician. I play several instruments to varying degrees of proficiency. I am not super well versed in music theory. I have taken many, many, many music theory classes in my life and retained so much less of it than I would like.
You know infinitely more than me, so you're starting from a stronger place.
So, well, all that to say, other musically inclined listeners, forgive me. But anyway, I'm just going to talk about the soundtrack, the sound design of this movie. Again, we've also mentioned on this podcast that I'm synesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
So I see sound and also feel sound to a lesser extent. This soundtrack is phenomenal. It is easily one of the greatest soundtracks ever. And that in part is because of the way that Howard Shore, the composer, approached it. He composed it all at once. much like it was being filmed all at once. He was composing the whole time. He started composing before it was filmed, before filming began. So he had already been given pieces of the script, descriptions, set pieces to start with. He was approaching it not as movie composers frequently do, as like a finished work that they're now going to put sound over, and they'll have a couple of months to do that. He had multiple years and has stated that he approached this as if it was an opera.
Ooh, I don't know anything about opera, but that makes sense to me.
Yeah, so he's approaching this as if it is, as if the music itself is part of the story. And for every great film score, the music is a part of the story, but I feel like this is almost to a greater extent than some of the others out there. Rather than have specific themes, he has what's referred to as leitmotifs, which are little musical phrases that refer to a specific character, group of characters, or place, culture. And he frequently doesn't have like single character leitmotifs. He has like group leitmotifs. And these will get woven together throughout the movie or orchestrated in different ways to demonstrate different things. The best way to sort of describe this is looking at the music of the intro. We hear music before anything else in this film. The music starts over a blank screen before the title, before Galadriel begins her narration, before there's any imagery whatsoever, there's music.
Oh, it's so eerie. It's almost like sort of Gregorian chanting. I know it's probably not, people who know about chanting
Yes.
would maybe say, oh, that's not Gregorian, it's a different kind of chanting. I don't fucking know the kind of chanting that they do in church. It sounds like church music, but like cool, ethereal, mysterious church music.
Well, and that's actually a vibe that they were going for with the elves. When we hear elves later on walking, or when we're in Lothlorien, that sort of vocal heavy, vocal forward chanting sound, in addition to the scale that he's using, gives a sense of timelessness, gives a sense of otherworldliness. He's using a Phrygian dominant scale here, or also the Arabic Hijaz scale, which kind of gives a sense of, it has sort of quarter tones in there, and it gives a sense of this being very different. Right? So we start with that theme. The next theme that comes in is the ring, one of the Ring's themes.
It sounds very God, see, I'm not trained in music appreciation, but it has kind of an ominous vibe. It sounds like a little old-fashioned, a little formal, a little like important, but also just a little bit off. Like something's like a little wrong with it.
Right. So that's the next thing that comes in. We then get, as we get the full history, we get pieces of Mordor's theme. We get, again, the pieces of the Ring, and then it shifts from minor into major when Galadriel stops and we start hearing Bilbo's voice.
Oh.
And that is the first time that we hear the Fellowship theme.
I remember you and also our friend Pat got very excited when the Fellowship theme came on.
Right. And it's, when we first hear it, it's still in a very stripped down form, but we hear that fellowship theme as we see the title, The Fellowship of the Ring.
Mhm.
And that is right after we have heard the Shire theme, too. As it shifts from minor into major, that's when we hear the Shire theme for the first time, which is your classic concerning hobbits vibe that everyone knows. And that gets played with different orchestrations, different instrumentations. All of these leitmotifs will throughout the story. And when they're inserted, they're showing, the entrance of different characters, the entrance of different themes. Another great way to hear this one is during the flight to the ford scene, when the Black Riders are pursuing Frodo and Arwen. You can hear the Fellowship theme in a not fully orchestrated format, almost being overrun by the Nazgul theme.
Oh, shit.
And the Nazgul theme and many of Mordor's leitmotifs usually have two parts to them. They have that really strong bass note, ba-dum, bum, ba-dum, that really, really heavy beat,
Mhm.
with the higher moving melody that sits pretty typically on one or two notes. And they're usually discordant with each other.
And it's also got some of that chanting vibe that the elf theme has, but in a
Mhm.
spookier, darker, more fucked up way.
Well, and the chanting vibe, they're both in Tolkien languages. The Nazgul theme is in Adunaic,
Mhm.
and the Elven theme is in Sindarin.
Do you have translations for what they say? It's okay if you
I
don't. I'm just very
don't.
curious. That's all right.
I
That will be
don't.
a thing for listeners to Google later. But that is awesome.
Yes.
I love that.
The choirs over the Mordor music are more in the style of like the Dies Irae or the Duel of the Fates type stuff. It feels angrier,
Mhm.
right? The other piece that really struck me about that flight to the Ford scene was the bass drum and timpani are almost mimicking a heartbeat
Mm.
for a moment. There's, when you're getting like the Fellowship theme, pieces of Arwen's leitmotif flowing before the Nazgul theme comes in, you still have that strong bass hit, but it's done in a heartbeat pattern until the Nazgul theme comes in, sort of representing the fact that Frodo's life is about to be snuffed out. The
Oh,
Fellowship
shit.
is dying before it even has a chance to get off the ground.
Mhm.
The Fellowship theme is also heard in a few other places when Frodo and Sam are leaving the Shire, when Sam says that this is the furthest from home he's ever been.
Mhm.
When they're joined by Merry and Pippin, when they're joined by Aragorn, when they're fleeing the Nazgul with Arwen, and then in Rivendell. But up until Rivendell, we don't actually hear it in its full orchestration. You get either like just strings, or you get a couple of strings and some woodwinds, or you get a couple of strings and woodwinds and like a French horn. And then when Aragorn joins, there's 3 French horns. And then and then it doesn't come in with like full brass, full strings, full woodwinds until the Fellowship is fully assembled in Rivendell.
I love that. That's awesome.
And we will only hear it one more time with full orchestration in Moria.
Oh, shit.
And after that, the orchestration fades off again as the Fellowship breaks up.
Mhm.
So the complexity of each leitmotif, of the repeat of each leitmotif, is sort of one way to show mood. It's one way to enhance the story. The other thing that he's using is like the type of the type of instrumentation.
Mhm.
So for the Hobbit theme. It can be played on woodwind very slow. It can be played on grouping of strings, sort of quicker. The Fellowship theme sounds very different in its in a string instrumentation that we see earlier on, and like the one I've sent you, than it will in brass heavy instrumentation, which we'll see a lot more in Two Towers, specifically with the Three Hunters. He uses frequently low brass as like an authority moment. Howard Shore said that he wasn't thinking so much about the type of instrument as he was thinking about the range of the instrument. He was dividing them more into high, middle, and low ranges rather than woodwinds, strings, brasses, percussion. This method of orchestration is very Wagnerian. It's very German opera.
Mm-hmm.
The soundtrack itself is not super Wagnerian, but because he was treating it as a complete opera, and because Wagner was one of the first to sort of use this leitmotif method, it's been frequently compared to Wagnerian opera and to the Ring cycle.
Now you have me wanting to go see an opera. Do you want to go see an opera with me?
Yeah, sure. Let's go see an opera.
Yay! Future
It
bestie day.
may have to be
I'll
German
plan it.
opera. I have not been. I actually don't think I've ever been to an opera.
First time for everything.
There's all sorts of different opera. I don't know opera super well.
Audience, if you want to DM us or email us, what opera should we go to?
I'm familiar with like some of the like Verdi ones, but not many of the others. Another thing about the scale of this composition, there were over 300 individual musicians, vocalists, instrumentalists that contributed to the score.
That's so cool. That must have been so fun to be like, I'm a working French horn player. That's my job, is I play French horn. And I got to fucking play French horn for the Lord of the Rings movies. That must have been so cool for those people.
The other thing that I really liked was the use of diegetic music.
You're going to have to tell me what that is.
That is music that exists within the world that the characters can also hear.
Ooh, yeah.
So, like, the group that's playing at Bilbo's party, like, that's part of the soundtrack. That is enhancing the scene, but also all the characters are dancing to it.
Mm-hmm.
That piece, interestingly, was not a Howard Shore composition. That was a composition by Fran Walsh and performed by the group Plan 9.
Very nice.
Who is on stage as the musicians, or on the screen as the musicians.
I love that.
Yeah, so they are actively playing in the scene,
Mm-hmm.
which is very fun. Let's see. I didn't have a very like super organized list. I just have like talking points.
No, this is really cool. I had seen some random YouTube video that was talking about like music in anime or something that I watched a few seconds of, because YouTube does those fucking little previews. If you just hover over something long enough, it'll start playing, and sometimes it does get me like that. And something that the guy was talking about was that it's much easier for a random layperson to identify visual storytelling in media than to identify musical storytelling. It's something that once you explain it, you go, oh, of course, that makes sense. But if you don't have the specific knowledge and background experience, then it's really hard to pick out and identify. So this is super interesting to me. Even though it's a very quick overview, I feel like my galaxy brain is expanding. It's all connecting. It's very cool.
Well, and I don't think that I really necessarily noticed all of this when I was watching the movie. I've seen these movies several times, and so, I'm familiar with when certain themes are coming in. I can identify particular themes, particular leitmotifs. But when watching the movie, I'm there for the visuals a lot of the time. the music just enhances the scene.
Yeah.
So a lot of this was from my external reading and research. There is an annotated score and like liner notes to the full score that were released. So you can read some of that. Besides Howard Shore, Fran Walsh, Viggo Mortensen, Plan 9, and Enya all contributed to the score and to the compositions.
Enya was not she especially, I think, is over the end credits, and we were all going, of course there's Enya in Lord of the Rings. Yes, this makes sense to us.
Yeah, I really love, much like the costumes, there are particular differences in instrumentation and in composition between different cultures.
Mhm.
You know, for Mordor and for the Orcs of Isengard, the orc themes, we get a lot more in like 5/4 time. We get a lot more percussion. We get a lot more like, harsh, discordant sounds.
Mhm.
For the Hobbits, we get a lot of Celtic type sounds, which has been heavily criticized by some critics for because the aesthetics of the Hobbits are based on English villagers rather than
True.
Celtic styles. You have vocal heavy and harmonic minor Gregorian chant style influences to the elves' music that is similar to some of the things that are coming out of Mordor, but executed in a different method.
Mhm.
And then for like the full fellowship altogether, you get the full orchestra. For, dwarves, you get again more percussion, more sort of industrial styles, but it's not as harsh as we hear for the orcs.
Mhm.
So it's again like you get a sense of underground, of hard stone from the dwarven music, but it's not, but we don't get the sense of like evil that you get from discordant sounds and from minor chords that you hear in the orcs music.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
There have been times when I, will come from listening to like a John Williams scored piece and kind of wish that there was like a Lord of the Rings theme in the way that there's a Star Wars theme. But the use of leitmotifs kind of creates this effect where you don't go like, oh, there's the theme again. We should be looking, but it still gives you enough of a touchstone to know that you're looking for something specific.
Yeah, it's like you were saying, it's a completely different approach to scoring the movie. And I think that if it had a theme TM, it wouldn't work as well. It's the way that it's made is intentional and it works.
It adds just so much. My last fun fact about the music is that the Shire leitmotif is taken from a 1901 hymn, This Is My Father's World. You can just listen to like the first like 4 seconds of it.
Yeah, okay. Oh, okay. I had to listen to it twice, but then I got it.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the Shire theme. And then it diverges, both the This Is My Father's World diverges off into its own melody and the Shire theme diverges into its own melody. But it's a fun little piece of going, there's an influence.
Yeah.
Because Howard Shore composed the score all at once for all 3 movies, we're going to see all of these again and get a few more additional leitmotifs as we meet new cultures, as we get to Gondor, as we meet the Rohirrim, as we see more of Gollum. We'll get new motifs, but it's fun to get consistency through the movies. And you always get consistency of style when you have the same composer across movies. And even when you have different composers, a good movie composer is going to try and pull from their predecessors to match the style. But because this is all one story, I think the use of these like individual themes that will carry through with each character and with each group makes them all feel so much more linked.
Mm-hmm. And also because these movies are fucking long, at least the extended, even the non-extended editions. And there's 3 of them. We are locking in for a long journey together. So there's time to establish all of these things. It's not like we're squeezing all the musical storytelling into one 90-minute chunk. We're settling in for a long journey. So in the same way that the movies are establishing a baseline for us to start off with in Fellowship and then continue through the next 2, we can have a baseline for our analysis of things to look for in Two Towers and Return of the King.
Mm-hmm. Lastly, just the score for Fellowship specifically won both an Academy Award for Best Original Score and also a Grammy.
Damn. As it deserves.
And the next 2 scores will also win multiple awards as well.
That rules. I love it.
These are absolutely incredible fucking movies. I'm excited to watch the rest of them. I'm excited to get your thoughts. I think one of my favorite leitmotifs is the Rohan theme, so I'm excited to get that one into the mix.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of want to get some of the sheet music for some of these because there's a lot of similarity between Rohan and Gondor's leitmotifs, but not. I don't know where I was going to go with that statement.
I'm intrigued. We can look at them together and you can try to explain the connections, and I may or may not get them, but it will be interesting.
Yeah. Do we have anything else we would like to discuss for the Fellowship of the Ring movie?
Not that I can think of. It was so fun. I really, really enjoyed it. I'm really excited to watch the next 2. And I feel like we have accomplished our goal of, because we weren't sure what new things we could possibly add to discussion of these movies. But I feel like we've got a good groove. We know how we're approaching them. The next 2 movie episodes will be in a similar format. And I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, if you like what you're listening to, you can subscribe to the podcast on whatever podcasting platform you're currently listening on, or a different podcasting platform, or both. I don't know. Have fun.
I was introduced to a friend's podcast, and then I immediately went and gave it 5 stars on multiple podcasting platforms because I went, I know how this is. I know the small podcast life. Let me give you the numbers. So, go ahead and do that if you want.
Yeah, you can leave us a 5-star review. Leave us a written review if the podcasting platform you're on allows that sort of thing. Leave us a comment. Again, if the podcast platform you're on allows that. That's like Spotify, YouTube, comment on our episodes, some of your thoughts, comment on our social media, drive up that engagement. Talk about the podcast to your friends. Still the best way for a small podcast like us to spread is word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
You can always email us at thefandomapprentice@gmail.com or interact with our social media at fanappod on platforms.
Go figure it out.
Where go for it. If we're on the platform, we're on there as at fanappod, FANAPPPOD.
Mostly Instagram and Tumblr. Those are the big 2 that we check a lot.
Yeah. But if you send me a message on Blue Sky, I'll respond. It just might be a minute.
That's fair.
Yeah, that's everything. I have no more thoughts. Smooth brain.
Then let's make a smooth transition into the end of the episode. Thanks for hanging out, everybody.
We'll see you in 2 weeks for the Two Towers.
See you next time. Bye.
The Phantom Apprentice is produced and edited by Rin and Sam. Our music is written and performed by James. You can hear more of his music on Spotify or on Bandcamp under the group Beiruz, Baeruz. Our art is by Casey Turgeon. You can find more of her work at KCT Designs on Instagram. The content discussed is the property of the Tolkien Estate and of Peter Jackson and New Line Cinemas, and is used here under fair use.